Egypt's president and Spain's prime minister reject Israeli operations in Gaza. Donald Trump denies that classified information was shared in secret chat. And an Israeli attack kills 6 in southern Syria. And it's 10 a.m. Cairo local time, and you're watching Q News, and I'm Salma Al-Fi'i. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. Egyptian President El-Sisi has firmly rejected Israel's ongoing military operations in Gaza. During a call with the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, they called for an immediate ceasefire, an end to the Israeli ground incursion, and urgent humanitarian aid. Sanchez emphasized that Spain supports the Arab reconstruction plan and aligns with Egypt in rejecting Palestinian displacement. El-Sisi and Sanchez agreed that a two-state solution is the key to regional security and stability, while also emphasizing the need for stability in Syria and Lebanon. Egypt's State Information Service has firmly denied claims that Egypt is supplying military aid to Israel, labeling them as baseless and delusional. SIS emphasizes Egypt's leadership in rejecting forced displacement in Gaza, its provision of over 75% of Gaza's aid, and its commitment to ending aggression. Their statement added that Egypt remains steadfast in defending justice, opposing the Israeli occupation, and upholding its long-standing national and moral principles, despite the heavy price it has paid. 8 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli airstrike on the El-Najjar family home in Gaza's Old Street in Jabalia. Several others remain trapped under the rubble. Palestinian media has reported that many of the victims, mostly women and children, sustained critical injuries. The surrounding homes were also damaged due to the heavy bombing. Jabalia has faced intense artillery bombardment, and local hospitals like the Indonesian hospital lack basic medical supplies as Israeli forces prevent aid entry. King Abdullah II of Jordan has emphasized during a phone call with the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez the urgent need for international efforts to halt Israeli attacks on Gaza immediately. Jordan's king stressed that the international community must compel Israel to implement the ceasefire agreement in all its phases and resume humanitarian aid deliveries. He warned of the grave impact on the innocent civilians and the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He reiterated Jordan's stance against the displacement of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, emphasizing that peace and stability cannot be achieved without a just solution to the Palestinian issue based on the two-state solution. France has condemned the escalating violence by settlers against Palestinians, particularly in the West Bank. The French Foreign Ministry called on Israeli authorities to protect Palestinian civilians and hold perpetrators of violence accountable. France reiterated its condemnation of colonial practices that violate international law, as noted by the International Court of Justice in its advisory ruling on July the 19th, and urged sanctions on extremist settlers responsible for violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. And moving on to Yemen, where the United States has targeted Saada province in northern Yemen overnight with 17 airstrikes. A local source informed the local news agency that 2 airstrikes hit the Sahar district of Saada, followed by 3 additional strikes on the same area. This comes as the U.S. military has been carrying out extensive air raids targeting Houthi positions in Yemen. On March the 15th, the U.S. President Donald Trump ordered a major attack on the Houthis. Yemen's Houthi group has claimed to have targeted U.S. warships and an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea, as well as military targets in Israel. The group's military spokesman, Yahya Saraya, said in a televised statement that their missile forces, drone air force, and naval forces carried out a joint military operation targeting the warships in the Red Sea. According to Saraya, the operation focused on the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Harry Truman, described as a launching base for aggression against the group. In a separate operation, Saraya said that their drone air force targeted Israeli military targets in Tel Aviv earlier using several drones. President Donald Trump stated that no classified information was disclosed in a secret group chat with the top U.S. national security officials, including a magazine journalist. Trump voiced support for his national security team when questioned about the incident at the event. Trump also said that the administration would look into the use of Signal, but he did not think Waltz should apologize.
Numerous attacks on that area. These are people that shoot down ships.
U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has taken responsibility for the leak about strikes on Yemen in a Signal chat that included a journalist from The Atlantic and called the leak embarrassing. Waltz confirmed he created the chat where highly sensitive details were posted about imminent U.S. strikes on Yemen and said those were not classified. Asked about the potential publication of more information from that chat, Waltz said he did not want it all out there.
Good talks on a location for the next.
Trump administration has scrambled to contain damage after a journalist was mistakenly added to a secret group chat discussing sensitive war plans. Democrats called on top officials to resign over the security incident. Top intelligence officials, including Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, told the Senate no classified material was shared on the encrypted Signal app. Senator John Ossoff warned Ratcliffe that his testimony would be compared to the chat's full transcript.
That he was present on the Signal thread.
And moving on to Lebanon, where the Israeli occupying military has announced the beginning of a large-scale drill in the northern command starting today, lasting until Thursday. The exercises will take place along the western border with Lebanon and extend across the front lines and coastal areas. The military stated that the drills will simulate protection of the region and responses to immediate field threats with multi-domain cooperation. These drills are part of the annual 2025 plan, with no security concerns anticipated. And now we move on to the latest developments in Syria. Syria's foreign ministry has announced that an Israeli attack killed 6 people in southern Syria, and Israel stated that it will not tolerate militant presence in southern Syria and has sent its troops into Syria's border zone. Syria's leadership has said it does not intend to open a front against Israel, and the Israeli military added that militants in southern Syria opened fire towards Israeli troops without specifying whether the Israeli troops were within Syrian territory when they were targeted. It further highlighted that its troops returned fire and that an Israeli warplane struck the militants. Jordan has strongly condemned the Israeli occupation forces' incursion and airstrikes on the town of Koya, west of Daraa, Syria, which resulted in casualties. The Jordanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs described the actions as a blatant violation of international law and Syria's sovereignty, further escalating tensions in the region. The ministry's spokesperson reiterated Jordan's firm rejection of Israel's ongoing attacks on Syrian territory, stressing Jordan's support for Syria's security and stability. UN Special Envoy to Syria, Geir Pedersen, has stated that the recent clashes on Syria's coast highlights the urgent need for effective accountability. Speaking at a UN Security Council session on Syria, he emphasized the necessity of a thorough and transparent investigation into the events, pointing to incidents of mass killings during the clashes. Pedersen also rejected Israel's presence in Syrian territories and urged the Security Council to press for Israeli withdrawal. He stressed the need for the Syrian state to control all weapons and address the unresolved issue of foreign fighters. Furthermore, he welcomed the de-escalation between Lebanon and Syria along their border and confirmed plans to return to Damascus soon.
A related challenge. The very concerning reports of incidents still taking place against the backdrop of the authorities.
Russia's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, Dmitry Polyanetsky, has condemned the Israeli strikes in Homs that killed and injured over 20 people in recent days. Speaking at a UN Security Council session in Syria, Polyanetsky urged Tel Aviv to honor its obligations under the 1974 disengagement agreement and withdraw its forces from the buffer zone and other occupied Syrian territories. He emphasized Syria's repeated readiness for peaceful relations with all its neighbors and warned that Israel's actions are only strengthening extremist voices within Syria, undermining long-term security for Israel. The Syrian Ministry of Communications has announced that the internet is gradually being restored across the country after being cut off from several hours due to sabotage. The ministry's media office stated that internet services were gradually returning to Syria after the disruption, which was caused by sabotage activities that led to the severing of 2 fiber optic routes in 2 areas. Internet monitoring group NetBlocks confirmed the nationwide outage earlier today, reporting that several cities were affected. And now we move on to the latest developments in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The Kremlin has stated that oil refineries, oil and gas pipelines, and nuclear stations are among the targets that Russia and Ukraine have agreed to temporarily suspend strikes on. The list also includes fuel storage facilities, pumping stations, electricity generation and transmission infrastructure, such as power plants, substations, transformers, distributors, and hydroelectric dams. According to the Kremlin, the temporary moratorium on strikes on energy infrastructure starts from March the 18th and is valid for 30 days, but it could be extended by mutual agreement. The Kremlin added that if the agreement is breached by one party, the other party is also released from the compliance. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has confirmed after talks in Saudi Arabia that Ukraine and the U.S. have reached an agreement allowing for a maritime ceasefire with Russia. The deal includes safe navigation in the Black Sea and a ban on attacks on energy facilities. Kiev will rely on Washington to enforce the agreement, though Zelensky noted that there are no clear consequences for violations. The move comes as the U.S. pushes for a swift resolution to the three-year war while also seeking closer ties with Moscow. The United States and Ukraine has confirmed an agreement on safety and non-aggression measures in the Black Sea following discussions in Riyadh. According to a White House statement, the U.S. committed to aiding Ukraine in detainee exchanges and detainee releases as part of the pact between the U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated that the Black Sea Maritime Security Agreement aims to restore Moscow's access to predictable grain and fertilizer markets, ensuring profitability and global food security. Lavrov emphasized that Russia seeks a stable market where no one can prevent its participation. Lavrov also highlighted concerns over food security in Africa and other nations in the global south, stressing the need for fair competition. The United Nations has welcomed an agreement the United States has reached with Russia and Ukraine on the Black Sea issue. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric welcomed the Black Sea navigation agreements, highlighting the UN's ongoing efforts on the issue since the war began. He noted that the UN official Rebecca Greenspan was in Moscow for pre-scheduled talks on Russia's Memorandum of Understanding and continues discussions in Washington and other key locations.
The start of this.
And we move now to Hani Saif in our newsroom. Good morning, Hani.
Good morning, Selma. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for all the economic news and the financial updates happening from all around the world, so stay tuned. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has met with Marco Rubio at the State Department during a visit to Washington. Fidan is asking U.S. officials in Washington this week to remove U.S. sanctions on Turkey and let the country back into a crucial fighter jet program as Ankara seeks a warming of ties with Washington under the administration of President Donald Trump. A Russian oil tanker has started unloading about 100,000 tons of crude oil in Banias port on the Syrian coast ahead of moving them to the refinery tanks. Two tankers hit by U.S. sanctions arrived in Syria last week, days after Moscow made its first known delivery of diesel there in more than a decade. The second tanker, Sakina, is still on its way to Banias with another 100,000 tons of oil. LSEG data showed and was set to arrive on March 25th. Both vessels are subject to the U.S. sanctions imposed on January 10th, as is the Umba storage tanker near the northern port of Murmansk, where both vessels loaded the volumes in February. Australia's consumer inflation has slowed in February, helped by a fall in electricity prices, while the continued easing in home building costs and rents supported the case for more rate cuts in the months ahead. Data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showed the monthly consumer price index was flat in February from January. The annual pace slowed to 2.4% from 2.5% versus forecasts for no change. A leading indicator of Japan's service sector inflation hit 3% in February. Service sector inflation is being closely watched by the Bank of Japan for clues on whether prospects of sustained wage gains will prod firms to continue raising prices and keep inflation sustainable around its 2% target. Bank of Japan data showed February year-on-year gain in the services producer price index slowed from a revised 3.2% increase in January. Oil prices have edged higher on supply concerns, with the U.S. stepping up efforts to limit Venezuelan and Iranian oil exports, while a bigger-than-expected drop in U.S. crude inventories also lent support. Brent crude futures gained 0.3% to $73.22 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures rose 20.3% to $69.20 a barrel. These are all the economic news we have for now, and now we head back to Selma in our studio. Selma.
Thank you, Hani, and that brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here's what we've been covering. Egypt's president and Spain's prime minister reject Israeli operations in Gaza. Donald Trump denies that classified information was shared in secret chat. And an Israeli attack kills 6 in southern Syria. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.